Public Information Office. We're here to talk about obviously several fires we had yesterday and what caused them and some safety messages that we're going to touch on. We have our acting fire chief, assistant fire chief John Carson here, and also the fire investigator that personally investigated this fire, Lieutenant Carney. So they're going to step up and give you some safety messages and also talk about the fire, what the cause was, and different issues as it relates to improperly discarded smoke material.
Gentlemen, start with your names and last name.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm the acting fire chief for Fairfax County Fire and Rescue. My name is John Carson, C-A-U-S-S-I-N.
Can you step a little closer to the mics, please?
Yes. You need me to start over?
No.
Okay. I want to thank you all for being here. I think this is a great opportunity to get some important messages to our communities. And I have some notes jotted down here because I think this is so important that I want to make sure I don't miss anything. You know, one of the things is we look at yesterday's events, and I spoke with our senior fire investigator who's been with Fairfax County 47 years, and he does not recall an afternoon or even a day as remarkable as yesterday. The teamwork and the joint effort by all public safety agencies, Office of Emergency Management, the agreements, the mutual aid agreements we have with our local jurisdictions, Loudoun, Alexandria, Montgomery County, Arlington. It was an all-hands effort to mitigate those fires yesterday afternoon. You know, it's a matter of teamwork. The men and women of Fairfax County Fire and Rescue rose to the occasion thanks to the investment by this community, by our Board of Supervisors, by our county executive and his team. We're able to provide this level of service. That and the relationship, again, with our elected and appointed officials in the adjoining jurisdictions. But, you know, one of the things, and I spoke with our fire investigator, Jeff Carney, you know, and we pulled up some data, and 40% of the structure fires Fairfax County has sustained so far this year have been a result of improperly discarded smoking materials, as was the case in this fire at this 4-story garden apartment style senior living facility yesterday. One of the other remarkable things about yesterday, and again I attribute all the men and women on the front line that were out here providing the service, thankfully there was no loss of human life yesterday. And that in itself is very remarkable when you look at the scale and the scope of what we were dealing with. But again, back to the original reason, or a very important reason we're here, to educate our community based on what we've learned, both as a public safety team, as an emergency management team, and as a community. There's just a few things we need the public to make note of. When it comes to smoking materials, please never dispose of cigarette butts in potted planting soil. The soil, when it gets too dry, is highly flammable. It's an accelerant. It acts as an accelerant. We need to make sure that people walking up and down the street, on their decks, on their balconies, never flick cigarettes into mulch or shrubbery. We need to dispose of them in a suitable ashtray or bucket with sand. And we need to ensure all smoking areas have appropriate fireproof containers, ashtrays, or buckets. Completely douse any cigarette butts and ashes with water before throwing them away. Otherwise, they can smolder and cause a fire in your trash bin. Of course, never smoke in bed. We need to keep smoking materials away from anything that can burn, any combustible product. The springtime, as the temperatures go up, as the humidity still low at this point in time, as you may have heard, that you all have put out in the media, and certainly our emergency management folks, in the springtime is when we have the red flag days, meaning brush fires, forest fires are very likely as if someone improperly disposes of their ashes. The same applies to the mulch around these buildings as well as the buildings themselves. So, as always, as we educate our children, our young people, keep matches and lighters up out of the reach of children and out of their sight. At this point, we'll hand it over to the our fire investigator on this fire to give you a little more detail on what our team discovered in the cause and origin investigation.
Thanks, Chief.
Good afternoon. I'm Lieutenant Jeff Carney with the Fairfax County Fire Marshal's Office. Common first name and last name is C-A-R-N-E-Y. Chief Cawson pretty much wrapped it up pretty good, so there's not a whole lot more I can add to it. Maybe a little bit on the timeline. This event started approximately 1:45 yesterday afternoon. First units arrived on scene to fire on the exterior of the building, rapidly progressing. It got up into the attic. And just continued to burn unchallenged up there until we had enough resources on scene and could extinguish this fire correctly. Pretty much it. Any questions? I mean, Chief pretty much wrapped everything else up. I'll answer any questions I can.
This is a question for either of you. Can you talk about, just as you were saying, a guy's been here for decades, hasn't recalled a day quite like yesterday, the challenge of having the department, although you guys knocked these all out, no fatalities, but just the challenge of having the department stretch that thin over a very short amount of time.
You know, that's a great...
If you could step up to the mics, please.
Yeah, you bet. That's a great question. I appreciate that because, again, I think it points to the fact we're a combination fire and rescue department. Our volunteers called people left their homes, they left their places of employment to upstaff units. The localities, the surrounding jurisdictions brought units into Fairfax County to backfill our stations so that those subsequent events, we kept the response time down. So it was only through those partnerships, again, with our volunteer operational members, with the agreements that we have in place, government to government, locality to locality. It was really those agreements, working with both Fairfax County police, sheriffs, Loudoun County police, sheriffs, it really was a public safety county government because so many agencies, I don't have time to list every agency, but that's what I mean when I say in all hands. Our Department of Family Services, Public Works and Environmental Services, I can go on and on and on. I will miss somebody if I try and list everyone, but it truly was all agencies contributing to help this community. As you know, there were over 100 people displaced on this event alone. And I believe we're around 30 at the townhouses about 2 miles from here. So that's a significant impact to this community. We're in a recovery phase now. We have staff over at the rec center, at the welfare center, helping people get back on their feet, making sure their medications are addressed and these sorts of things. So excellent follow-up question. And that's how we were able to do it, through all those partnerships and all those people coming together as one team.
Would you say that teamwork saved lives yesterday?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's remarkable. 4 fires in a compressed time period and no loss of life. It's remarkable, and I attribute it a lot to everybody's contribution.
Meanwhile, investigators are going, or firefighters are going inside to try and pull out people, right? Wasn't there 75, I guess, rescues yesterday?
Yeah, yesterday, upon arrival, commensurate or concurrent with the fire attack, our men and women off the apparatus and, again, from the adjoining jurisdictions. Primary search is always, the #1 priority on any type of emergency incident, and there were at least 75 apartments evacuated. Some of the occupants were able to self-evacuate, but the incident commander passed on, as we talked about yesterday, at least 75 apartments were evacuated.
And some of these people can't walk, so was it like carrying people out, or, because they're elderly, some of them.
I know the scale of assistance across the board. Yes,
Sure.
You're right.
And then today, firefighters went back and retrieved items, it sounds. Can you talk a little bit about the efforts that they did? We spoke with one woman who said, firefighters saved her life again because she has her medicine that will keep her alive.
Well, and again, it goes back, that question takes us right back to the partnerships and the teamwork demonstrated to help people in this event. Our building inspector was out here. There was great concern with the stability of the structure itself. What you all are familiar with, Virginia Task Force 1, our urban search and rescue team, which we have structural engineers as part of the team. We brought them in to meet and confer with the inspectors, and from that we developed strategy to safely send our first responders in to get those medicines, those IDs, and other essential items that the occupants need to move on with the recovery.
Carson, this fire spread so quickly because it got through the attic and spread from unit to unit. I know regarding this building was built in 1997, so NFPA and most likely didn't require firewalls. I can't see a gypsum or masonry firewall for the units, but I'm an entree eye, certainly. But talk to me in a sense about the importance, the advantages that firewalls have in preventing the spread of fires from unit to unit.
And you're right, the codes do change over time. In that time period, we do know firewalls or draft stops in big common attic areas are required. And that's where some of the conditions, like today's still a breezy day. The unfortunate thing is, based on the right conditions, wrong conditions, however you want to look at it, sometimes those walls or those partitions or draft stops can be jumped over. In the case of this fire, where it got into the interior voids of the building quickly, the vinyl siding didn't help, and then once it got up in that open lumber yard of the attic space and the prevailing winds, that's what our firefighters standing behind me can attest to, the fact that these wind-driven fires can be a real challenge. You know, so the elements do matter when we're out here performing fire suppression or fire extinguishment activities, and that's something we're in constant discussions at a state level, local, state, and national level on codes, so we can take the lessons learned and see if we can get the codes updated to account for some of the conditions that I just described. It's an ongoing process.
So just so I'm clear, there were firewalls present in this.
It met code, absolutely. I can say safely that there were requirements to have, at least at certain intervals, draft stops or firewalls, if you will.
And sprinklers as well?
Yes, these buildings are fully sprinklered. The fire marshal's office is looking at that system. They're doing an assessment of the system. Reports are at least one sprinkler head went off, but here again, some of these designs are based for a normal quote-unquote day. Yesterday was not a normal day when you take into account we're in a red flag condition, very dry, low humidity, prevailing winds or prominent winds. Those sometimes can override the system. So that's something that our firefighters, again, they have experience with that and have to adjust to that. So.
Is this considered a complete loss? How do you describe it?
That's the building inspector is probably more qualified to speak to that than I am. I can only operate from what I know, and that is that inspector, as far as re-entry, initially condemned the building, but a lot of that had to do with the volume of water that was in the building. Obviously, we're closing in on 24 hours later. Some of the structure's been relieved of that water weight, what have you, but there's an ongoing assessment with our building official and inspectors, and we'll keep both occupants and our first responders out of harm's way by strategically going in there using the resources we have to determine what areas are a go or no go.
Will neighbors be able to get back in though, I wonder? Were they ever going to get back into their homes, I guess folks on this side, or are they probably going to have to find
that? I really have to defer to the building inspector on that, between building, health department. Those people do that for a living. They come in, they want to make sure that they don't let anyone reoccupy an area that's not safe and up to code or standard, if you will. So that will be an ongoing assessment.
Sir, the big fire yesterday, I know when we were talking about the townhomes, this one, we had many more people, lives on the line here. The big fire, it seemed like there was a point where you guys just kind of had to let it burn. Could you just kind of talk about that and the reason for that?
Yeah, and I think we nailed down, well, I read it. So another reason we're talking about discarded smoking materials. That fire is a result of discarded smoking material in the mulch around an evergreen tree right at the corner of the building. That you've all seen the videos of the dried Christmas trees going up. That's essentially what we had on the corner, and it immediately got up into that big, huge attic area of that, luckily, standalone bank structure. The employees self-evacuated, but what our firefighters were faced with, once again, driving winds in a big open lumber yard, and that was a very complex event. So we never got to a point where we quote-unquote let it burn, but the firefighters Well, the firefight was very difficult.
Here go the gutters.
Structural stability. You can see why we're cautious.
Prevailing wind.
Yeah.
Chief, so summarize what's the outcome? What's happening now? What's the outcome? Summarize what's happening now.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we're in a recovery phase. We have Fairfax County Office of Emergency Management, Family Services, Health Department, our Fire and Rescue Battalion Commander, as well as paramedics are over at the Welfare Center, working with the occupants, working with families incoming to help them find shelter, working with the Red Cross, who, as always, they've been invaluable in this whole process. So we're in a recovery phase, really trying to get those occupants back up on their feet. Building management has been very cooperative, very helpful to help us account for everyone. So really it's a matter now of getting the people, building inspectors, insurance companies, recovery companies in here and, get all those boxes checked and begin with the recovery of the structure itself so people can move back in. But right now, temporary living arrangements are being made again through multiple agencies and family members and what have you. I think our faith-based community's been a big help with that as well.
And Chief, can you talk a little bit about the townhomes and what we know, what we're learning today about that?
That one's there was, and I don't remember if you got down there, but the structural stability of that was really, it was obvious that it was unstable. So our fire investigators had to get that area secured, and by that I mean they had to go ahead and knock down some freestanding unstable brick walls before they could get in there. To my knowledge, we don't have the cause and origin of that yet, but the same conditions existed 2 miles away as they did here, perhaps even more so because of the building layout, the dry conditions, the prominent winds, and vinyl siding did not help our firefighters. They were and that came in just 20 minutes after this. So, thankfully our Public Safety Communications Center and our uniformed fire officers had done move-up companies. The volunteers had put units in service, so we kept that reflex time down a little bit, but the fire was well underway when our men and women arrived, and it was a challenge from the get-go. And the extension to the row behind that is a result of the prevailing winds coming from the back and pushing that heat and fire to that next row behind.
Do you know how many units are damaged there?
A minimum of 10 we know. And
Okay.
there were also 2 other rows that some of the units had some heat damage.
Okay, so
But a minimum of 10.
10 destroyed.
I'm going to say 10 significantly impacted. I think 5 we know we term destroyed. The other 5 on the back row are significantly damaged and could not be reoccupied.
Okay.
Okay, if there's no more other questions, we appreciate everybody coming out, and we please, if nothing else, please get out there the word. We gave you the safety tips on proper disposal of smoking materials. If you want to know, if you need copies, we'll get them to you. But thanks again.